All right, so let's build a really simple swing application to just a really simple drawing program, just so that we can practice on drawing on the screen and dealing with buttons and controllers and models and views and whatnot. So let's create a new project. So let's maybe call it Intro to Swing. Oh my goodness. All right, so let's start off with perhaps a main class. Excuse me. Java class, so this will be main.java. And let's make sure that this runs. Excuse me. Public static void main with args. And just say hello world first. See that this actually runs here. System that out that println hello world. And let's run this. Yes, maybe, no. There we go. So okay, so we're in business. All right, so as we have sold you the idea, it's good practice to break up an application into the MVC design pattern. It's an architectural design pattern. So let's start off with what the model might look like. Right, so as a model, presumably we might want to create several shapes, right? And perhaps have a list of shapes that we want to iterate over. And maybe we have different buttons that we can add a square, we can add a circle, we can add a triangle, and then maybe move them around. So we do need a shape, and this might be an interface. And so all interfaces want to be able to draw, right? So they would all implement perhaps a public void draw. And they would be implemented in different ways, right? The rectangle would draw one way, the circle would draw some other way. But we'd like to be able to treat them in such a way that we can have maybe an array where we have all the shapes, regardless of what shape you are, and we can polymorphically iterate over this array, and each one would know how to draw itself, right? They will all need to have a graphics G that would then be used to actually draw a square, rectangle, a circle, and whatnot. Yes? And then we can have all sorts of shapes. Maybe we can have a rectangle shape, a rectangle. And the rectangle might implement this interface. So implements shape. And so it's asking us that we need to implement that particular, it's asking us, hello, to implement that particular method, which is draw, there it is. And internally we might say, let's see, we might say that g.draw rectangle, I think, yeah, rectangle. And rectangle takes an x, a y, a width, and a height. So here's so we do need an x, we need a y, and need a width, and we need a height. So let's see. For an x and a y, perhaps we might. I think that represents the top left corner, right? And the width and the height, is what it says. Perhaps the width and the height makes sense for us to keep. For us to implement right here in the model of the rectangle. XY seem to be something that could be grouped into something that's much higher level, like a point, right? Like a 2D point. Yes, maybe that would be a better way to model that there. So let's do that. Let's keep track of some public final width as an integer, width and height. Okay. And it's complaining, saying that it's public, so ideally we want to maybe initialize them in a constructor and then never again, right? The only possible way that we can initialize them is a constructor, and then, you know, since it's public, we don't want anybody to be able to change the state, yes? That's why it's final. So we could say something like public rectangle, and we could take as arguments perhaps an int width and int height, and then initialize our width with width and our height with height. Okay, it's not complaining anymore. We probably need this x and y from somewhere, and we might decide that perhaps a better way to, yes?
Can you explain what you made with that public? Isn't it usually like that?
Well, if it's final, it means that it's kind of like a constant, so nobody can actually change it. So they can have readers. Ideally, you would have maybe a setter and a getter, where you can specifically control what is that you want to access from someone else. But I'm treating it almost like a constant, right? It can only be initialized once in the constructor and then never again. So after that, it's almost like a constant. So global constants are okay. The only bad thing about a constant is that if somebody changes it, right? But it's a constant, you can't. So it's okay to make it global accessible, right? So same thing here. It's okay. It's public because no one cannot be changed. So the only folks can only read from it, right? They cannot change it ever, right? Only through a constructor. Obviously, with setter and getter, I could control more like validation. I could, so certainly I would probably want to do that. But I'm lazy today. Right, so we're going to take the x and the y, and we're going to create an abstraction on that, right? Perhaps put a public, a point to the. So let's do that. Let's put a point here. Maybe call it point, or pixel, or something, right? And that point can have the x and the y here, so that would be public, final, and this is int x and y, and then the constructor can create this, right, with int x and int y, and then initialize these, right? So this dot x x and this dot y y. All right, so same thing, right? The only way that I could possibly instantiate or initialize x and y is through the constructor, and then folks can read it but cannot change it. So once I have that abstraction, I can perhaps in my constructor over here use a point instead of x and y, and perhaps I can keep track of that here, final point. So this might be called top left. And top left would be passed in through here. So maybe point top left, and then initialize it here. So this dot top left will be equal to this top left, right? So now I can use this x, y from my top left. So top left dot x, and this would be my top left y, right? Perhaps we could use it, keep it private, and since we're in the same package, yes. Since we're in the same package, perhaps we have access to each other's values. So we could leave maybe the default access modifier. All right. So we have the rectangle. Let's do one more maybe. Let's do perhaps a circle. So the circle might look like this. So circle. It implements the same shape. And in the shape, we need to implement that one function called draw. And the draw here might be that perhaps it has like a center, represented as a point, and maybe a radius. Yes. So certainly we need to keep track of those two things. So we'll have maybe public final. center as a point, and then maybe a final integer as the radius. And both of them should be initialized to our constructor, so only once and then never again. So we'll say maybe something like public circle, and provide the point center and then the int radius as part of the constructor, and we can say, you know, this dot center equals center, and this dot radius equals radius. Now that we have that, we can draw here and say that, well, we're going to draw. We're going to say g or graphics dot draw circle or draw oval, I think. We might need to do some arithmetics here. We have x, y, and I think that's the top left, and then we have the width. So it's kind of like a rectangle, yes? So probably we'll need to do something like center x minus radius minus. So we have to calculate the top left off of the center, yes? So we'll need to go subtract radius, you know, to go the x where the top left is. I'm sorry, wait. The top left, so we have to add, right? Add radius. Add or subtract? Can you help me? Let's see, because here's the center. I want the top, so I want to subtract the width and we'll subtract the height. Yeah, subtract. That was correct. So this would be center dot y minus radius, and then the width will be what? Will be the width will be the radius twice, right? Multiplied by 2. Yes, right. So radius times 2, and the height will be again radius times 2, which will be basically the diameter, right? Diameter of the oval. Yes, all right. Makes sense? Everybody still with me? All right. So we could have a whole bunch of these, and the model. Right, obviously, we would have ovals and triangles and whatnot, a whole bunch of shapes, and each one would have its own draw implementation. And the model would be just what? Just maybe a list or an array of these shapes. Yes, right. So this would be maybe the model. Could be perhaps some lists of shapes, and this would be the shapes. Java util. And this would be maybe a new array list of shapes. Okay. Oops. And then maybe we could have a means to add new shapes, right? Or maybe remove shapes, or edit shapes, or retrieve all the shapes. Yes. So we have something like public void, you know, add shape, something like that. Add shape. Right, which would do something like, you know, this dot shapes dot add shape. Right, whether it's oval or triangle or rectangle, doesn't really matter. And maybe for rendering, we might, you know, the controller might ask the model, hey model, you know, give me what the shapes are so I can send it over to the view for rendering. You know, so it would be something like, you know, public list shape and get all the shapes. And return the this dot shapes. Okay. All right. Notice that here, obviously we didn't make it public since it's being modified over time. Yes, we're adding, and only the model should be allowed to do this through the interface. Right. Nobody should be allowed to modify this other than the model. Right. Controlled by the controller. So the controller decides. So this is when we make it private. Okay. All right. So I think that's the model. Obviously, we could add a whole bunch of things like remove a shape, or update a shape. You know, maybe if we want to resize it, or maybe rotate it. Right. So it certainly would be through the model. For the view, it might look something like this. So we have so for the view, maybe we can represent it as a J-frame. J-frame, it would have something like maybe a couple buttons, right, that will allow you to add a rectangle, add a circle, add a triangle, add whatever. So we create a whole bunch of buttons here. Maybe the add rectangle button, new J button, add rectangle, and a couple of these. Maybe add a circle. Maybe add. That's what we have, right? Rectangle and circles. All right, let's leave that. Just those two. And then inside of the frame, we would maybe have the top half of the frame like a canvas where we can draw, and we can have like the buttons at the bottom, right? That we can put all our buttons, right? So we could do that. So as a constructor, we might say something like public view. We could ourselves as a frame use a layout where we lay out the buttons at the bottom of at the bottom of the screen, and then just leave the center for our canvas. So maybe we could create like a layout. We could set the layout as a border layout, right? And then have a J panel at the bottom that has all the buttons. So let's create a panel that can have all the buttons. So J panel, like a button panel, new J panel. And set its layout could be just a flow layout. We can just add a whole bunch of them so it renders from left to right. Yes, and hopefully horizontally have enough space to fit all the buttons, right, without having to wrap. So we can have the button panel set the layout to a new flow layout, and then we can add the two buttons to that panel. So we could say something like button panel, add the two buttons, right? The add rectangle button, and then we can add the other button, maybe the circle button to it. Okay. Once we have that, we can perhaps start setting the layout of the whole frame. Maybe we can bring this down here, and we can say that we're going to add to the bottom. We can say we're going to add the J panel, the new button panel. We're going to add it to the bottom. So that's border layout dot south. Right. So the border panel breaks it up into south, north, east, west, west, east, and then center. Right. And we can just leave the center untouched, so we can just draw on top of that. So once we have that, we can just pack this and say maybe pack. Where's pack? Pack. Maybe we can set the size. We can set the size. Maybe 500 by 500 pixels. And maybe we can now show ourselves. We can say set visibility to true. Okay. So let's try this out. Let's see. In our main, we could perhaps instantiate these two things. Right? You can instantiate the model. So we can say model, new model, and we can instantiate the view, new view. Right? And let's see what this if this explodes. Oh, there it is. So, it didn't seem to like my size. Let's see why not. So let's quit that. The view, probably the order in which I think pack goes first, maybe. Let's try that. Oh, there it is. Okay. Right. So we have the two buttons at the bottom, and we have the canvas at the top. So presumably, as we click through these, right, we would notify the controller, right? Some controller, and the controller say, okay, the view is dumb. They don't know what to do. So they delegate to the controller, and the controller is the one who tells the model to create these new shapes. So a really quick controller might look something like this. So the controller might will keep track of both instances of the model and the and the view. So we'll keep track of instances, references to these, view and model, and it will serve as a traffic cop, going back and forth between these two, right? So we'll say maybe in the constructor it will take us arguments both, the view and the model, and say that this model is the model, and this dot view is the view, right? Now that I have the view, this would be a good time to tell the view, hey view, I'm the controller, right? Any events that you generate, you notify me, right? I'm handling all your event handlers, right? Obviously, you could use the action pattern, a whole bunch of other design patterns, right? But we'll keep it simple here. So we might say something like, hey, view, this dot view. I'll say that set action listener this, meaning, hey, notify me of all your events. I am implementing an action listener. Okay, I'm implementing the action listener, and any buttons that come my way, I'll handle them through this action perform method. Yes? Okay. So yeah, this action listener doesn't exist, so we can tell the view to create that method. There it is, the action listener in the view, and just keep track of that action listener somewhere. We could possibly say something like, here's my controller, and actually not controller, probably action listener, and then you can notify all the buttons. You can say, this, add circle button. We're going to say that the action listener is that controller, right? And same thing with the rectangle. Add rectangle button. The action listener is that controller. Meaning, the view doesn't know how to handle any of this, right? It's delegating everything to the controller. The controller will know what to do, and probably we would want to set some action here. We'll say something like the hey action listener, this dot action add circle button will set the action command something like add circle or some token, maybe some enumerated data type would be better. But again, I'm lazy today. And here the button would say something like add rectangle, so that the controller, when it handles this, we can just get what the action command was. We say string action command is equal to the event get action command, and then from here you could do something like a switch statement, or if you're using the action pattern, there might be maybe a map, right? And based on that map, you can then delegate all this and pass the model to that action command. Yes. But we'll do something trivial here, as in you have the action command, and from here, depending on whether it's add rectangle case, we can do a system. We could probably do something like model dot add shape, and we can just instantiate a brand new rectangle. So new rectangle, and with a new point for the top left, which is maybe 2020, and width 100, 100. Yes? Or if maybe a break. What's wrong with my add rectangle? Oh, I got two of them. Okay, two circle, and this would be add a circle. And circle has a center and it has a radius. There we go. Right, and we do a break. And probably tell the once they've been added, perhaps some defaults here too. Then once they've been added, we can go back to the view and say, hey view, redraw yourself, right? So draw yourself, and we can pass it from the model. We can get the shapes. Here are the shapes, I'll pass you down the shapes, and the draw on the view, view, implement, oops, create the shapes, would be, something like iterate over this. You say, over the shapes, excuse me, would, let's see, perhaps copying them locally, shapes, list of shapes, and then this dot shapes equals shapes, and then call our paint function, public void paint. Paint, because we're inheriting paint from JFrame, right? Which this would where we actually would do the drawing, right? And here's where we would iterate and draw all these, right? So we'll say maybe repaint. Repaint will call paint whenever the next cycle is available, right? For the UI to render itself. And here we could go just iterating over these, right? So we'd say for shape in shapes, you would call shape dot draw and pass it the graphic instance to paint itself, right? So let's see if this blows up. It blew up. All right, so let's leave this and finish this up tomorrow.